In the quiet city of Pella, where the morning sun spilled its golden light over stone streets and gentle hills, a boy was born whose name would one day echo across the world: Alexander. From the very beginning, he was not like other children. He was quiet, observant, and thoughtful, carrying in his small frame a mind alive with curiosity, a heart open to wonder. The streets of Pella were alive with the bustle of merchants, horses, and the rhythm of daily life. Yet young Alexander often walked alone, as if the ordinary world could not fully hold his imagination. He would linger by the riverbanks, trailing his fingers through cool waters, watching sunlight ripple across the surface, imagining distant lands far beyond the horizon. Even as a child, his eyes were wide with questions, absorbing everything, yet always searching for more than what met the eye. He was captivated by stories. Homer's epics, the adventures of Achilles, the cunning of Odysseus, were his companions in the quiet of the evening. He did not merely read, he lived within the words. Each hero became a guide, each challenge a lesson in courage, honor, and strategy. In the flickering candlelight of his room, he traced the battles on imaginary maps, placing armies of thought and reasoning where no foot had ever trod. These tales were more than stories. They were the first lessons in leadership, imagination, and the boundless possibilities of the human spirit. Alexander's mind was restless, a river flowing in directions others could not yet see. Where other children played with toys, he constructed entire miniature worlds. Pebbles became soldiers, sticks transformed into spears, and shadows on the walls became enemies to outwit. Every play session was a rehearsal of strategy, a test of foresight, a small but significant step toward understanding the art of conquest. He learned to think not just in the present, but in the ripple of consequences, in the layers of possibility that the future might hold. His parents watched him with a mixture of awe and concern. Olympias, his mother, whispered tales of divine ancestry, of heroes running through their blood, of destiny awaiting her son. Philip, his father, the king of Macedonia, observed the spark of ambition, the intensity of focus, and the rare glimmer of greatness. Alexander listened to both, absorbing lessons of courage, cunning, and lineage. He internalized each word, transforming them into vision and vision into purpose. In the quiet corners of his mind, he was already preparing for the world beyond his home, for challenges that would test more than strength, challenges that would test imagination itself. Evenings in Pella carried a gentle magic. The wind rustled through olive trees, and Alexander would climb the hills, gazing at the horizon as if it whispered secrets meant only for him. Mountains became gateways to unknown lands, rivers became paths to adventure, and every distant city on the map was a story waiting to be told. The young boy imagined battles he would never fight, yet knew how to command, cities he would one day enter and people he might lead. In the quiet of these contemplative moments, a dream of greatness began to take root. Alexander's life in these years was not marked by spectacle, but by the small, profound acts of attention and reflection. He observed the habits of birds, the movement of the sun across the sky, the changing tides of rivers. He noticed patterns in nature, rhythms in human behavior, lessons hidden in everyday moments. He was learning not from teachers alone, but from the world itself. A tutor far older and wiser than any mortal. And yet, he was not untouched by playfulness. His imagination was not rigid. It was alive and wandering. He crafted imaginary kingdoms, sometimes mimicking the battles he had read about, sometimes inventing entirely new worlds. Every stone and stick, every shadow, every whisper of wind became a piece of his mental map, a rehearsal for the faraway conquests he would one day undertake. In the quiet, poetic rhythm of these hours, Alexander was not just a child. He was a mind preparing for immortality. He was a boy who saw the ordinary and found the extraordinary within it. Where others saw streets and rivers, he saw journeys. Where others saw walls and buildings, he saw possibilities. His curiosity was relentless, unyielding, a spark that would one day ignite a fire spanning continents. Alexander of Pella was learning the earliest lessons of strategy, leadership, and imagination, without knowing yet that these lessons would one day change the course of history. This was the beginning of a legend, not with fanfare or battle cries, but with silence, observation, and imagination. In the quiet streets of Pella, under the soft golden light of dawn, a boy dreamed of worlds he had never seen, armies he had never commanded, and victories that were still distant in time. In that dreaming, the first whispers of greatness were heard, a whisper that would one day grow into the roar of history itself. Alexander's story, like all great stories, began not with fame, but with a question: what lies beyond the horizon? And in his heart he knew, if he could imagine it, he could one day make it real. At the age of 13, Alexander left the familiar streets of Pella and entered a world of ideas that would shape his mind forever. Under the tutelage of Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of the ancient world, the young prince discovered not only knowledge, but a way of seeing the world, a lens through which every mountain, river, and human thought became meaningful. Aristotle's classroom was unlike any Alexander had known. Scrolls and texts filled the room, their words ancient yet alive. The smell of parchment and ink mingled with the soft light filtering through tall windows. Here Alexander learned about the stars, the earth, the intricate patterns of nature, and the subtle rhythms of human behavior. The boy who had once traced rivers with his fingers now traced the invisible threads connecting all things, cause and effect, logic and consequence, action and purpose. But learning was never passive for Alexander. He questioned, probed, and challenged. If Aristotle spoke of virtue, Alexander asked how it could guide a leader. If Aristotle explained the movement of planets, Alexander wondered how the heavens could shape the fate of men. He absorbed lessons not merely to recite them, but to live them, to integrate them into his imagination and strategy. Every discussion was a seed planted in a mind that was fertile, restless, and hungry for understanding. The lessons were not limited to philosophy alone. Aristotle encouraged him to observe, to think critically, to explore the connections between knowledge and action. Science, ethics, poetry, politics, and the natural world, all were threads woven into the tapestry of his education. Alexander learned to see the world not as isolated events, but as a vast web of possibilities, a stage upon which intelligence, courage, and imagination could dance. Evenings were filled with reflection. Alexander would pace quietly in the gardens, the scent of olive trees and wildflowers drifting in the air. He would recount the day's lessons to himself, imagining how they might apply to future decisions. The stories of Homer merged with Aristotle's philosophy. The tactics of warriors blended with the principles of logic. Slowly, meticulously, the foundation of a mind capable of conquering worlds was forming. Alexander's relationship with his tutor was unique. Aristotle saw in the boy not only potential but fire. He nurtured curiosity while instilling discipline, wisdom alongside daring. Sometimes Alexander would challenge Aristotle, asking questions that stretched the boundaries of the lesson. The philosopher would smile, recognizing the spark of genius that could not be contained, a flame that would one day illuminate distant lands and forgotten histories. Beyond the classroom, Alexander applied what he learned. He practiced riding, fencing, and hunting with a keen awareness of strategy and precision. Each action, even in play, reflected the teachings of Aristotle: balance, observation, planning, and timing. The young prince understood that knowledge without practice was incomplete, and that the mind and body must move together, harmonized like a well-tuned instrument. Through these years, Alexander's imagination continued to expand. Maps became more than geography. They were possibilities, a world waiting to be explored. Conversations became lessons in diplomacy and leadership. The natural world became both teacher and companion, offering insights into resilience, adaptation, and the delicate balance of life. Every bird in flight, every flowing stream, every star in the night sky carried a whisper of understanding, waiting for Alexander to hear it. Even the city of Pella itself seemed to prepare him for greatness. Its markets, temples, and streets offered glimpses into human ambition, commerce, faith, and politics. Alexander observed the ways people interacted, the power of persuasion, the subtle currents of influence, the courage and folly of ordinary men. These small observations would later become the foundation of his genius in leadership and conquest. And so, under the watchful eyes of Aristotle, Alexander grew not only in knowledge, but in vision. He learned that wisdom was not simply the accumulation of facts, but the capacity to see connections, to understand the world as a living, breathing whole, and to act upon it with intelligence and integrity. The lessons of the classroom, the gardens, and the streets merged with the lessons of imagination, forging a young mind capable of transcending ordinary ambition. This was the making of a conqueror, not through brute force but through understanding, a prince who would one day command armies and nations, yet whose foundation was built upon thought, reflection, and the poetic rhythm of curiosity. Alexander learned that the truest victories begin within, in the discipline of the mind, the courage of questioning, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. In the calm of twilight, as the sun dipped behind the Macedonian hills, Alexander would stand quietly, looking toward the horizon. He saw not just the lands of Macedonia, but the lands beyond, the cities, mountains, rivers, and peoples waiting for discovery. Each lesson from Aristotle had sharpened his vision. Each story from Homer had stirred his courage. And each question he asked had opened a doorway to greatness. The boy who once traced rivers with his fingers had now traced the patterns of the cosmos and the currents of human thought. He was ready in mind and imagination to step beyond the familiar, to embrace the challenge of destiny, and to journey toward a future where the limits of the world could be tested and perhaps rewritten. At the age of 20, the boy who had wandered the streets of Pella and listened to the words of Aristotle became a man standing on the threshold of destiny. Alexander was no longer just a student or a dreamer. He was now the heir to the throne of Macedonia, carrying the weight of a kingdom and the ambitions of a father whose vision was as vast as the mountains that surrounded their land. The palace, once a place of quiet observation and study, now echoed with the murmurs of politics, strategy, and intrigue. Courtiers whispered of plots, generals weighed their loyalty, and neighboring kings watched Macedonia with wary eyes. Alexander, though young, understood that power was not given. It was claimed, nurtured, and defended. Yet he did not seek dominance for its own sake. His desire was a fusion of intellect, courage, and vision, to unify his people, to expand their world, and to leave a mark that would endure. In the early mornings, before the sun touched the peaks of the Pindus Mountains, Alexander walked the palace gardens, contemplating the lessons of his youth. Aristotle's words echoed in his mind: the harmony of knowledge and action, the balance of courage and reason. Homer's heroes whispered from the pages of his memory, guiding him in matters of honor, loyalty, and strategy. Every step, every glance, every decision was measured, deliberate, and infused with the understanding that greatness required not haste, but clarity. His first challenges came swiftly. Revolts and unrest simmered in the provinces. Rival generals questioned his authority, and whispers of dissent reached the throne. Alexander met them not with brute force alone, but with strategy and insight. He listened to advisers, observed his enemies, and anticipated the moves that others overlooked. Diplomacy, subtlety, and the calculated use of fear and respect became his tools. He understood that a leader's strength was as much in perception as in arms. Yet there was no arrogance in his rise. Alexander remembered the lessons of his youth: humility, curiosity, and the poetic beauty of the world around him. Even in moments of triumph, he would pause to gaze upon the sky, the rivers, and the hills, seeing not just territory, but the endless possibilities of the human spirit. His mind was alive with maps, strategies, and visions of lands beyond Macedonia, lands that beckoned with the promise of adventure. discovery and conquest. Alexander's charisma grew alongside his reputation. Soldiers admired his courage, not merely for bravery in battle, but for the depth of his mind, his ability to inspire loyalty, and his uncanny insight into human nature. He listened to their stories, understood their fears, and offered visions that made them believe in a future greater than themselves. He was not simply a king in title. He became a king in essence, a leader whose presence shaped the hearts and minds of those around him. But power was never simple. Every decision carried weight. Every victory invited scrutiny, and every challenge tested not only strength but judgment. Alexander faced enemies within and beyond, conspiracies that threatened his reign, and the constant tension between ambition and responsibility. Yet through it all he remained calm, measured, and guided by the principles instilled in him since childhood: knowledge tempered by action, courage balanced with wisdom, and imagination intertwined with discipline. In the quiet of his chambers, Alexander often returned to the lessons of Homer and Aristotle. He would sit by candlelight, tracing the lines of maps, imagining armies in motion and pondering the lives of those he would one day encounter. He considered not just victory but justice, not just conquest, but the legacy he would leave behind. Every move he planned was a delicate dance of foresight, a reflection of the boy who once traced rivers with his fingers and dreamed of worlds beyond the horizon. As his authority solidified, Alexander began to envision more than the borders of Macedonia. He imagined campaigns into lands that even seasoned generals thought unreachable. Persia, Egypt, distant mountains and deserts all became canvases for his ambition. And yet, even in these grand visions, there remained the quiet, poetic mind of the boy from Pella, who found wonder in rivers, mountains, and the flow of sunlight across the land. The rise to power was not marked solely by victories or proclamations. It was a transformation of character, a forging of intellect and intuition, courage and patience. Alexander became a man who could command armies and navigate politics, but also a man who could dream deeply, reflect quietly, and see the world not merely as it was, but as it could be. In the hush of twilight, as shadows stretched across the palace walls, Alexander stood upon the balcony overlooking Pella. The city he knew as a child, the riverbanks he once wandered, and the hills he climbed all seemed to whisper encouragement. The boy who had traced the waters with his fingers was now a king poised to cross continents, to challenge empires and to turn imagination into reality. This was the rise to power, a blending of intellect, vision, courage, and poetic reflection. The world had begun to recognize Alexander, not just as a prince or heir, but as a force, one whose mind and heart were aligned, whose ambition was tempered by wisdom, and whose destiny was quietly yet inevitably unfolding. When Alexander crossed the borders of Macedonia, the world beyond unfolded like a vast tapestry, woven with mountains, rivers, deserts, and cities whose histories whispered through time. Every horizon called to him, promising challenges, knowledge, and the possibility of transformation. To Alexander, these lands were not merely territories. They were stories waiting to be understood, canvases for vision, and mirrors reflecting the depth of human ambition. He moved with purpose, yet never in haste. His army, loyal and disciplined, followed him not simply because of duty, but because they believed in the vision he carried. Alexander understood that conquest was more than the clash of swords. It was a delicate balance of strategy, perception, and psychology. Every march, every encampment, every dialogue with allies or adversaries was a brushstroke in the grand painting of his campaigns. He anticipated the movements of enemies as a master painter anticipates the next line, orchestrating outcomes with precision and foresight. The first battles tested both courage and intellect. Yet Alexander's genius lay in perceiving patterns invisible to others, the subtle weaknesses, the unspoken fears, the hidden opportunities. He moved his forces as if playing a game upon a board stretching across continents, each decision calculated, each step both bold and measured. The plains of Asia Minor, the hills of Persia, and the deserts beyond became stages upon which his imagination choreographed victories that would later enter legend. Beyond the strategies and maps, Alexander never lost the poetic eye of the dreamer. In the quiet hours before dawn, he would stand upon a hilltop, feeling the wind against his face, listening to the rustle of olive trees, watching sunlight dance across rivers and valleys. To him the world was alive. Mountains breathed, rivers spoke, and cities held secrets. These moments of reflection were as vital as the battles themselves, grounding him in the wonder that first inspired his journey. He respected the cultures he encountered, absorbing their knowledge, philosophies, and art. Entering a city, Alexander listened as much as he commanded, learning the rhythms of daily life, the values of its people, and the stories that had shaped them. His conquests were not solely territorial. They were an integration of wisdom, diplomacy, and imagination. Through understanding, he wove unity from diversity, blending the old with the new in a vision that transcended mere dominion. The battles themselves, though intense, were approached with serenity of mind. Alexander envisioned outcomes beyond immediate conflict, orchestrating maneuvers that surprised allies and enemies alike. The sun rose and set over plains and rivers, yet even amidst the chaos, Alexander maintained the calm clarity of thought that had defined him since youth. He measured risk, foresaw consequences, and acted with a precision that combined intellect with instinct. And yet, victory did not diminish his reflection. Walking among soldiers, he acknowledged courage, shared stories, and reminded them that each life mattered in the tapestry of empire. Every individual was a thread in the larger design, and every decision required balance between ambition and humanity, strategy and compassion, conquest and understanding. Through vast lands and foreign territories, Alexander's journey became a poetic epic. Each city taken, each alliance formed, each hardship overcome was a stanza in the story he lived. He understood both the immediate and the eternal, blending logic with imagination, action with reflection. Maps were no longer mere geography. They were stories, challenges, and dreams waiting to be realized. Evenings were moments of introspection. As the sun dipped behind mountains and deserts, Alexander would sit quietly, contemplating the battles fought, the lessons learned, and the future that stretched endlessly before him. He recalled Aristotle's wisdom, Homer's heroes, and the boyhood dreams that first shaped him. The world was vast but not unknowable. It waited for him to move through it with clarity, purpose, and imagination. Alexander's conquests were not simply military campaigns. They were a weaving together of vision, courage, wisdom, and empathy. He bridged cultures, united peoples, and inspired loyalty not only through power but through understanding. He was simultaneously king and student, warrior and poet, conqueror and dreamer. Each decision, each movement, each choice reflected a mind capable of seeing the infinite possibilities hidden within the world. At night, by the glow of campfires, Alexander would reflect on the rivers and mountains he had crossed, imagining the lands yet to be known. He considered not only victory, but the meaning of leadership, the essence of humanity, and the legacy he would leave. The boy who once traced rivers with his fingers had become a man tracing the currents of destiny itself, mapping a course across continents, civilizations, and time. This was Alexander, the conqueror of worlds, a man whose greatness sprang not from haste, fear, or arrogance, but from the calm depth of observation, reflection, and poetic imagination. A conqueror not only of lands but of understanding, not only of battles but of human hearts, not only of empires but of the very possibilities of history. In every step, in every horizon, in every victory, he carried the quiet brilliance of a mind that saw the world in its entirety and dared to move within it with courage, wisdom, and wonder. As Alexander's empire expanded, so too did the weight upon his shoulders. The boy from Pella had become a man commanding continents, yet within him the quiet, reflective mind of youth still whispered questions that no conquest could answer. Ambition propelled him forward, yet humanity tethered him to the people, the cultures, and the stories he encountered along the way. His friendship with Hephaestion was one of the anchors in this turbulent life. Hephaestion, loyal and wise, knew Alexander as few others did. In their conversations, laughter, and shared silence, Alexander found a mirror for his own soul, a companion who could understand not only the grandeur of his vision, but the doubts, fears, and longing behind it. These moments of intimacy revealed a side of Alexander rarely seen by others, a mind and heart capable of deep empathy, compassion, and reflection. Alexander pondered the nature of leadership as he gazed upon cities he had conquered. How could one maintain power without losing the essence of justice? How could ambition coexist with mercy, and conquest with understanding? These questions were never answered fully, yet he explored them daily, seeking balance between the fire of his desire and the quiet moral compass Aristotle had instilled within him. In quiet moments before dawn, Alexander would walk through the campfires of his army, observing soldiers' faces as they slept. He reflected upon their sacrifices, their loyalty, their fears, and their dreams. Each life mattered to him, and he considered the cost of every decision, knowing that power without humanity could lead only to emptiness. It was this awareness that made him not merely a conqueror of lands, but a student of human nature, a ruler seeking to understand the heart as much as the battlefield. Even amidst campaigns, Alexander remained a philosopher in action. He listened to local elders, absorbed their wisdom, and pondered their customs. In Egypt, he marveled at the pyramids and the stories of dynasties past, contemplating the fleeting nature of human endeavor against the backdrop of eternity. In Persia, he reflected on the cycles of empire and the delicate threads that held civilizations together. These reflections shaped his approach, guiding him to act with both decisiveness and respect. Yet the tension between ambition and humanity was constant. Decisions weighed heavily, to punish or to forgive, to conquer or to negotiate, to lead with fear or with inspiration. Alexander felt the loneliness of command, a solitude born of understanding that no one else could fully grasp the magnitude of his responsibility. And in that solitude, he discovered a strange comfort, for it allowed him to hear the quiet voice of his conscience amid the clamor of strategy and expectation. Alexander's dreams were not solely of power. They were of legacy, of shaping a world where knowledge, culture, and courage could flourish together. He envisioned cities where Greek and Persian ideas intertwined, where libraries held the wisdom of continents, where art and philosophy could coexist with strength and order. Ambition and humanity intertwined in this vision, each guiding the other, each giving purpose to the other. He thought often of the stories that had shaped him, Homer's heroes, Aristotle's lessons, the rivers and hills of Pella. These memories were a compass, reminding him that greatness was not measured only in victories, but in understanding, in the ability to see beyond oneself and act with both courage and conscience. Alexander's poetic mind allowed him to perceive the invisible patterns of life, the way loyalty could inspire, mercy could bind, and imagination could transform reality itself. Evenings brought reflection as the sun dipped beyond the mountains. Alexander would sit silently, sometimes with Hephaestion, sometimes alone, contemplating the lives he had touched and the lands he had traversed. He thought of soldiers fallen in battle, cities changed forever, and cultures blended under his reign. In each contemplation, he sought to reconcile the fire of ambition with the softness of empathy, understanding that a true conqueror must navigate the delicate balance between action and reflection, power and conscience. Alexander's humanity was also revealed in his moments of quiet generosity. He would honor the traditions of conquered peoples, offer protection to the innocent, and reward those who showed wisdom, courage, and loyalty. He understood that leadership was not merely command, but cultivation, of trust, of knowledge, and of the hearts of those around him. Ambition without this understanding could lead only to emptiness. Greatness without empathy could never endure, and so Alexander's life was a constant dialogue between ambition and humanity. The fire of conquest burned brightly, illuminating new horizons, yet the calm, poetic mind within him reflected on every decision, every action, and every life touched by his journey. He understood that the world was not simply to be taken, but to be understood, respected, and guided with wisdom. In this balance, Alexander became more than a conqueror. He became a thinker, a philosopher king, a visionary whose story transcended battles to embrace reflection, friendship, and moral insight. The boy who traced rivers with his fingers had grown into a man tracing the currents of human nature itself, mapping not only empires, but the intricate patterns of ambition, conscience, and empathy. Thus, between ambition and humanity, Alexander's legend was forged, a testament to the power of vision tempered by reflection, the courage to act guided by wisdom, and the eternal dance between desire and conscience. In this delicate balance, he moved across continents, leaving a legacy that would inspire the hearts and minds of generations to come. Even after his campaigns ended and the dust of battle settled across continents, Alexander's presence lingered, not only in maps and cities, but in the imagination of humanity. His footsteps had crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains, yet it was the path of his mind and vision that left the deepest mark. The boy from Pella, the student of Aristotle, the conqueror of worlds, had become a legend whose echoes would transcend time. The cities he founded, from Alexandria in Egypt to countless settlements across Persia and Central Asia, became more than strategic posts. They were beacons of culture, centers of learning and bridges between worlds. Libraries, temples, and marketplaces thrived under his vision, blending the wisdom of different civilizations. Alexander understood that the truest conquest was not merely of lands, but of knowledge, understanding, and connection. His influence on those around him was profound. Generals, soldiers, scholars, and citizens alike carried pieces of his vision into the future. His leadership inspired loyalty not only through authority but through example, a combination of courage, curiosity, and humanity that few could emulate. Tales of his campaigns, his intelligence, and his empathy spread, reaching distant lands long after he had departed. Yet Alexander's legacy was not without its shadows. The relentless pursuit of greatness demanded sacrifices, lives lost, cultures transformed, and a weight of responsibility that few could bear. Even in triumph he reflected on these costs, aware that ambition, when untethered from humanity, could leave a void. And in this awareness, he became a more complex figure, a reminder that greatness is intertwined with reflection, and that history remembers not only victories, but the hearts that were touched along the way. Poetry and philosophy continued to guide him, even as empires bowed and surrendered. He contemplated the meaning of life, destiny, and the nature of human aspiration. The boy who once traced rivers with his fingers now traced the currents of history itself, seeking to understand how one life could ripple across continents and centuries. In quiet moments under the stars, he wondered about the future, about how humanity might remember him, and whether the ideals he cherished would endure beyond conquest. His dreams of unity among cultures were revolutionary. By blending Greek and Persian traditions, languages and ideas, Alexander planted seeds that would influence generations. Art, science, literature, and philosophy flourished in the spaces he touched. He had seen that knowledge and empathy could survive where armies could not, and that the mind, when guided by imagination and reflection, could conquer as surely as any sword. The legacy of Alexander also lived in the stories told by those who followed him. Poets, historians, and philosophers chronicled his life, capturing the rhythm of his ambition, the poetry of his mind, and the humanity within his conquests. Every tale, whether grand or intimate, carried the echo of a boy who had dreamed beyond the horizon, who had learned from Aristotle, and who had forged a world shaped by both courage and contemplation. Even today, centuries later, Alexander remains a symbol of vision intertwined with reflection. He reminds us that ambition without understanding can lead to emptiness, and that greatness is measured not only in victories, but in the ability to inspire, to learn, and to imagine. His life is a testament to the power of curiosity, the necessity of empathy, and the enduring influence of a mind that dared to dream boldly. As the sun sets over the sands of Egypt, the mountains of Persia, and the rivers of Macedonia, one can imagine Alexander walking quietly among the lands he shaped, not merely as a conqueror, but as a thinker, a dreamer, a man who understood that the truest legacy is written not only in stone and history, but in the hearts and minds of those who come after. The story of Alexander the Great does not end with his death. It lives on in every mind that dares to imagine, in every heart that seeks courage, and in every spirit that strives to balance ambition with humanity. His life is a bridge between the possible and the extraordinary, a reminder that one individual, guided by vision, curiosity, and empathy, can indeed leave a mark upon the world that time cannot erase. And so, from the quiet streets of Pella to the vast horizons of Asia, Alexander's legend endures, a story of a boy who dreamed, a student who learned, a king who conquered, and a human being who sought to harmonize ambition with the poetry of life itself.